Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. It's Jessica Donovan here, and I'm excited today to be continuing our series on low-tox swaps, simple swaps that you can make to reduce your family's exposure to chemicals and toxins. And this week we are talking specifically about plastics, some simple swaps that you can make to reduce your family's exposure to plastics, and why you might want to, take this quite seriously. There are some chemicals, some particular chemicals within plastics that have been shown to, be quite detrimental to our health. And although it is unrealistic to get rid of plastics from our life altogether, there are some, really effective things that you can do to reduce your family's exposure. So last week we talked about a simple thing that you can do to reduce toxins and chemicals coming into your home. So you can go back and listen to that after you've listened to this one. And this is all in light of a Four Corners episode that we talked about recently on the podcast. I'll pop the link to that podcast show in the show notes, as well as a summary or an article about this Four Corners special. It was called Generation Cancer, and I was inspired to do a podcast series on low-tox swaps because within that information that they shared, that there was some alarming increases in the incidence of cancer in young people. We're talking about young people under 40 years old. And they talked about, the statistics are going to only get worse if we continue on the current trajectory. And one of the contributing factors to this higher incidence of cancer is thought to be our exposure to so many different chemicals and toxins within our environment. So I thought, let's turn around what is quite a heavy, scary topic that can be quite anxiety producing, and we can kind of feel like, wow, this is too big for us to do anything about. I wanted to turn that around into something that was more inspiring and motivating and action orientated in terms of things we can do as parents to reduce this exposure to chemicals and toxins that is just getting worse for our kids. And that in turn can, do them the world of good in terms of their health currently and in years to come, specifically reducing that risk of them being one of those statistics, those young people that develops cancer. So, it was tricky for me to figure out how to share this information or even decide whether it was a helpful thing to share this information, because I know it can cause a lot of anxiety and pressure on parents who are already overstretched. And that's why I wanted to really break it down into bite-sized pieces of information on this podcast, but talking particularly about one thing that we can do. And so today we're talking about plastics. So as you know, plastics are everywhere, and the chemicals within plastics, are quite detrimental in so many different ways to our health, and we're going to talk more about that. But what we can do is take some simple steps to reduce our family's exposure to the hormone-disrupting chemicals within plastic and these compounds that are potentially cancer-causing as well. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about BPA and phthalates. So I also just want to say, just because something says BPA-free doesn't mean, it's completely safe. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So, of course, we all know that plastics are not good for our environment, but that we also need to be aware that plastics are chemically active. They contain thousands of additives and byproducts that can leach into food, water, and dust, and then accumulate in our bodies. And on the Four Corners Generation Cancer special, there was a pediatrician and environmental health researcher, Dr. Christos Simendes, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, from the Minderoo Foundation. And he was saying we are exposed to a broad universe of synthetic chemicals that our biology isn't familiar with, and that has left a great deal of uncertainty. He also says that within the universe of plastic chemicals, we're looking at about 16,000 chemicals. Only 1/3 of them have been evaluated. And of the ones that have been evaluated, 75% have been found to be hazardous. So there is so much we don't know about the impact that these chemicals found within plastics, these chemically active compounds within plastics, are having on our human body. But we do know that many of the chemicals are endocrine disruptors. They affect hormones, development, metabolism, immune function. And we also know that early life exposure is especially concerning because it can reprogram long-term health outcomes. And this is one of the things that they're looking into, is how exposure to different chemicals early in life could potentially be contributing to this high incidence of humans being diagnosed with cancer in their 30s and 40s. So it's not always like an immediate impact that these things have on our body. So, we focus on children's health here at Natural Super Kids. So all these little things that we can do to reduce our kids' exposure now can make such a difference into the future. And, I know that as parents, we have so much on our plates. Some weeks and days, we're just kind of keeping our head above water in terms of the immediate things that need to get done. And these sorts of topics can make us feel like, oh my gosh, it's another thing we have to think about. But when it comes to our kids' health and their long-term health outcomes, I think that's a pretty important place for us to focus some of our attentions. So, two of the worst offenders when it comes to plastics are BPA and phthalates, and both are linked to increased risks of early onset cancers, obesity and insulin resistance, hormonal imbalances, so things like polycystic ovary syndrome, infertility, miscarriage. We know these things are all on the rise as well. These BPA and phthalates, these plastic chemicals, are also linked to things like cardiovascular disease, neurological and developmental issues in children. So let's talk about what they are. BPA, bisphenol A, is used in hard plastics. And look, we've come a long way. A lot of plastics are now BPA free. And you'll see when you're buying new hard plastics, the majority of them, maybe even all of them, I'm not sure, will say BPA free, but there's still plastics within our environment that aren't BPA free, that were kind of, released before stricter regulations came in. And the other concern is that, as I said, and as we were just talking about, not all of the chemicals within plastic have even been tested. So we know BPA is damaging, and so we want to avoid it. But we also want to take that sort of bigger picture look at plastics and try and minimize plastics generally where we can as well. But BPA is found in those hard plastics, so bottles, containers, and also linings of cans, including, canned foods. And then we have phthalates. Phthalates is spelled PH phthalates. So it's a pH, phthalate. These are used to make plastics soft and flexible. So phthalates, of course, are found in things like toys that our babies are putting in their mouths. Personal care products, food packaging are full of these chemicals, phthalates. So kids are exposed to both BPA and phthalates through food packaging, things like cling wrap, soft plastics, canned foods, baby food cans, pouches, lunch boxes and drink bottles, especially soft or clear plastics, toys and teething products. We want to really make sure that toys and teething products are labelled BPA and phthalate free where possible. Plastic kitchen utensils and non-stick cookware, shiny printed receipts. You may have heard, that we want to try and avoid touching receipts. There's been some research done on, people that are working in cashiers. You think about the teenagers that are working at the supermarkets and are touching receipts all day, every day. Those shiny printed receipts contain some of these plastic chemicals. And personal care products, so things like fragrances, lotions, shampoos, can contain plastic chemicals as well. Clothings, synthetic fabrics, plastic motifs and logos on fabrics and clothing can also contain some of these plastic chemicals as well. So it's not just the obvious plastic wrapping or plastic lunchbox or plastic drink bottles that we have tended to move away from, in more recent years. A lot of us have anyway. So kids are especially at risk when it comes to exposure to plastic chemicals for a number of different reasons. One is that their bodies are still developing, especially their endocrine and their immune systems. So that leaves them more vulnerable to the effects of these plastics and what they're doing to their still developing bodies. Kids also eat, drink, and breathe more per kilogram of body weight than adults. So that leaves them more vulnerable to the health impacts of all chemicals, including these plastic chemicals. Kids often put plastic items and hands that have touched plastic into their mouths, especially young children. And exposure to chemicals in pregnancy and early childhood can influence lifelong disease risk. So what our babies are exposed to, what our kids are exposed to when they're in utero really does matter. And for many of us it's too late for those years. We really do need to start from where we're at with the information that we have and move forward rather than feel guilty about what we may have done in the past. We do better when we know better, and so we can only move forward. So let's talk about some simple, easy to implement, doable swaps to move away from so much plastic in our lives and to reduce that exposure to these plastic chemicals for our families. So one thing we can do is use glass or stainless steel food containers to store food in as opposed to plastic. We can choose stainless steel lunch boxes and drink bottles, or at least BPA free. I think there's been a real shift towards more, stainless steel drink bottles, moving away from those plastic drink bottles. And particularly the softer the plastic, generally, the more damaging chemicals that they have in them. So we want to, move away from those plastic lunch boxes and drink bottles where we can. Try and avoid plastic wrap, Glad wrap, cling wrap where you can. Beeswax wraps, reusable silicone lids. Like I said, the softer the plastic, the more plastic chemicals that it will contain. So even a harder plastic container is going to be better than soft plastic. And we always want to heat food in glass or ceramic, not plastic. This is a real bugbear I have. We think about takeaway containers. If you get Thai takeaway, hot food is put straight into these plastic containers. So many ready-made meals are packed in plastic and it's just chuck it straight in the microwave. When we heat food in plastic, it releases the heat releases the chemicals from the plastic, and they end up, some of them will end up in our food. So heat and plastic do not mix. If your plastic drink bottle is sitting in the car and it's warm and then you're drinking from it, that is a no-no. So, if you are using plastic food containers and plastic drink bottles, always make sure there's no heat in the mix as well. And so if we are wanting to store, say if we've made a big pot of nourishing soup, and we want to pop it into containers to store, we might not have enough glass or stainless steel containers, or we might not have any. At least cool that soup down. Let it cool down before you pour it into plastic containers. So heat and plastic is a definite no-no. That's one of the biggest things I want you to get from this episode. I do definitely still have some plastic containers for food storage, but I really avoid putting anything hot in them, heating any food in them, and also I try and steer clear of storing fatty food in them as well. So because fat and plastic aren't a good mix either. Okay, so when it comes to personal care and home, we want to choose phthalate-free and fragrance-free personal care products. I mean, fragrance is a whole nother topic, but fragrances can contain some phthalates in them. So we want to try and use fragrance-free, phthalate-free where possible. Now, I have a teenage daughter, so this feels like an impossible mission for me. But I just do the best I can. And again, we've got to meet our kids halfway. We only have so much control over what our kids are going to be doing. Yes, we can have rules. Yes, we can have boundaries. But, it can feel like an uphill battle sometimes when it comes to, for example, teenagers and fragrance-free, or when it comes to fussy eating and getting veggies into our toddlers. So we need to do the best we can, and also educate and explain why these rules and boundaries exist for our kids, and help to educate them. When it comes to cooking, we want to steer clear of those plastic utensils. Use wooden or metal cooking utensils. Say no to receipts. So opt for e-receipts or no receipts where possible. Thermal receipts are a major BPA source, so we want to try and avoid those as much as possible. And we want to use cast iron or stainless steel cookware over non-stick. Now, I'm going to do a whole nother episode on non-stick chemicals in the kitchen, but these products can also contain some phthalates and other plastic chemicals as well. When it comes to babies and young children, teething toys, choose natural rubber, organic cotton, or untreated wood over plastic. Avoid soft plastic toys. As I said, the softer the plastic, the more damaging or the more harmful the chemicals in it as a general rule. So we want to, again, try. I know that it's impossible to avoid plastic toys. Well, it feels impossible in the Western world to avoid plastic toys altogether, but we want to try and make sure the plastic toys that our kids do have access to are as safe as possible. And so, if we can choose products that are BPA and phthalate free, that is a big tick. And more wooden toys, toys that are made from natural substances are much better. Avoid those squeezy baby food pouches where possible. Use jars or fresh as an alternative. Now, this doesn't mean you can never give your baby a squeezy pouch. Of course, they have their place. They can be really convenient, but we do not want babies living off those squeezy baby pouches, or our older kids living off those squeezy yogurt pouches. They do contain plastic chemicals. And what we dress our kids in matters as well. This whole rise in fast fashion, there's a lot of synthetic clothing made from polyester. these contain plastic chemicals. So where possible, we want to choose natural fibers like cotton, bamboo, wool, especially underwear. So if we need to prioritize, I get it. Like these sorts of clothing items can be more expensive. So we may not have all natural clothing for our kids, but where possible, if we can choose cotton or wool, for bedding as well, steer clear of, the more synthetic clothing and bedding. And as I said, especially when it comes to underwear, because that's what's sort of closest to our kids' bodies. Now, it's just crazy to me, and this was sort of stated in the Four Corners episode, that chemical regulation is backwards. So the way that it works is that chemicals are assumed safe until they are proven harmful, even when there's been no testing. So it is up to us as consumers to be educated and to make, the right or informed personal choices. So yes, we need to push for better regulation, but we need to act now as parents to lower our family's burden when it comes to these toxins and chemicals. Really the way that it should work is we should not be releasing chemicals into the environment, into, any products that are widely available until they're proven safe, but it does not work like that. And that is just so crazy to me. And I think a lot of people don't realize that we assume these things are safe until they are tested and proven harmful. And we saw that with BPA. BPA was widely available in products. And then we're like, actually, this doesn't look like it's a very safe chemical due to the research that has been done on it. So we're going to now remove it, rather than it being the other way of, chemicals needing to be rigorously tested before being released. It's just not the way that it works. So we are it's up to us to make these low tox choices. Now, I know plastics can feel like such a big, huge, overwhelming topic, and there's probably lots in that list that you're thinking, I need to do that, I need to do that, I need to do that. So write down a list of changes that you are wanting to make and just choose one to focus on every week until you work your way through them. You do not have to do everything overnight. You don't need to overhaul your whole kitchen, your whole house overnight. Just choose one plastic swap to focus on this week. Remember, every swap that you make is a win, and it's a step toward raising a generation with fewer toxins and chemicals in their system. So that's what I want you to focus on. One thing from the list that we talked about, that you can switch for a safer alternative. One low-tox plastic swap that you can make. And I would love for you, if you're on Instagram, share a low-tox swap that you're making, a swap from a plastic product to a non-plastic product, or a way that you're reducing plastic. Share it on your Instagram stories. Tag me. That way you're inspiring everyone with a low-tox swap that you're doing. You can mention that you heard this information on the Natural Super Kids podcast if you like, but tag me. I would love to see the swaps that you are all making. I hope this has been really helpful. I hope you're feeling empowered and inspired, and we're going to continue our low-tox swaps conversation next week. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.